Hello and welcome to MZ Webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have with us today our presenters, Anthony Horn, who is the Director for Sales at MZ, Carla Hoff, who is the Accounts Director at MZ, and also Tom Lowe from the Collab Group. We're going to be talking about how we can support you in relation to your COVID response and recovery. There is an opportunity to put questions to the presenters. If you would kindly put them in the questions box on the control panel of your GoToWebinar, and we'll endeavour to get back to those at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Debbie. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Very excited to be hosting today's webinar. Delighted also to be joined by Tom Lowe from the Collab Group. So with the theme of positioning your college or your organisation as a local leader through and beyond the current situation, there are a number of things we plan to discuss today. After a very quick introduction to MZ, I will highlight some of the key labour market insights that we've seen so far during the COVID period, with a hint towards what the most recent data might be starting to tell us about the future as the labour market and the wider economy starts to open up again. Then I'll ask Tom to talk us through how the Collab Group sees the FE sector responding as leaders, both now and during the coming months. After that, we'll have a quick run through how some MZ data and other labour market data can help colleges and providers to truly lead on behalf of their local labour markets and communities, by putting plans in place and then putting those plans into action. And then finally, I'll talk about why colleges and providers could and should be shouting about the significant regional economic impacts that you already have. Now, before we get into those main agenda points, just a very quick introduction to MZ for any of you joining us today who aren't familiar with us. We are a global labour market data firm headquartered in the United States, with operations in a number of countries, including here in the UK, as well as Canada, Australia, and other geographies around the world. And that very focused mission there is about spending our time investing in solid, reliable labour market data, and then providing that data to the outside world so that you can make more informed decisions to help your business, and then ultimately help individuals, educators and businesses all connect together, with skills increasingly being the central element that connects those three audiences and us all together. Now then, what has been going on in the labour market over the past 5 months is pretty unprecedented. So we'll have a quick look now at what that has been looking like and what the key messages are that we can take from what the data has been telling us during this previous period. Now, when we're talking about useful labour market and skills data, that means a combination of large scale, well organised structural data, which typically comes from government sources like the Office for National Statistics here in the UK, as well as big data, which tends to be less well organised, can be quite volatile and needs to be sourced from a huge variety of places, but can often give specific, in-depth, timely insight into things like skill trends and specific employer demands. That data is also typically more up to date than structural governmental data. So by combining those two together, we see the most useful insights into what's happening in the labour market. Because the big UK government data sets, the structural data, hasn't yet caught up with what's happening in regional labour markets because of COVID, and actually won't give us a comprehensive view of industry sector impacts until later in the year. It's actually the big data, so stuff coming from things like job postings data, that's been most useful to us over this recent 4 or 5 month period in allowing us to see immediate term detailed local activity in the labour market. And what has that been? Well, unsurprisingly, and I think we all know, we've seen a significant slowdown right across the economy. And unsurprisingly, that has translated into a massive slowdown in employer hiring activity across the months from March. And again, that's been the case across all regions, which is quite unusual. So in economic slowdowns, we often see some regions actually performing reasonably well, whereas over the past 5 months, when it comes to employer activity and employer hiring, all regions have been negatively affected. And then through that same period, particularly into recent months, we've seen a significant rise in the claimant count data. Now, just a note here, this is not a measure of total unemployment, but it's a significant subset of that, and it allows us to consider local geographies and job-specific changes in that unemployment space. So what the claimant count data is telling us is that there is indeed increase in unemployment across all regions, and again, reflective of all jobs suffering during this past 5 months. That said, we have seen some signs of positivity, fingers crossed. So over the past few weeks, as more and more sections of the economy are opening up and are moving again, what we see here on screen are employer job posting change by region over the past 30 days. And London's basically stayed the same, but all other regions are seeing growth in employer recruitment activity, albeit from a pretty low starting point, from the worst point of the COVID crisis. But hopefully, growth in the past 30 days is a sign that things are beginning to churn again, and hopefully we'll see that continuing. You see there, the biggest growth in that 30-day period has been seen in the Northwest. And if we look on this next slide at the 10 jobs that are driving that growth across the Northwest, so the 10 jobs that have seen the biggest increase in employee demand in that region, then what we actually see is growth in employee demand for all kinds of jobs here. So from protective services, that's the police and fire service, through to a number of different things like driving jobs there, construction jobs at skilled and elementary level, even leisure jobs, which is positive. So again, hopefully positive signs that most areas of the labour market are starting to move in the right direction, and most types of jobs are seeing that positive change. And then further to that point, if we look at the 20 skills most in demand from employers in the Northwest in that past 30-day period, again, we see a really broad spread here. So a broad spread of skills are being requested from employers. Quite a bit of tech and digital stuff in there, which I suppose is not surprising, given that we're all using technology a lot more right now, and businesses are using technology a lot more right now, but also various additional skills that employers are calling for, in this case, in the Northwest in the past 30 days. But before we get too excited, let's just quickly think back to furlough, which we're all experiencing. I'm sure we've all got personal experience of, and consider what the furlough data is showing us, and how employment might actually start to pan out once furlough schemes come to an end. So what this graph shows is huge numbers of workers have been furloughed in the UK labour force from March. More than a quarter of all workers, more than a third, in fact, in some regions. And the big question, I think, is about what actually happens when furlough support schemes come to an end. How will that actually pan out in terms of unemployment? And what we saw from the Office for Budget Responsibility, I think the week before last, was that their central scenario has unemployment at something like 12% predicted for the end of this calendar year, which is pretty huge. And just as the words on this slide kind of suggest there, furlough doesn't equate to unemployment, of course, but it's kind of giving us a good hint of potential worst case scenarios and how unemployment might actually track going forward. I think what we're actually likely to see are different regional labour markets behaving differently as the furlough support comes to an end, because we can actually start to see that happening already. And what this chart on screen shows is for each LEP region, along the horizontal axis, the percentage of workers in those regions that were furloughed in May. And then on the vertical axis, the growth in unemployment claimants from just before the lockdown started. So we're comparing furlough and unemployment here. And what we really see is quite a different picture. So we see different LEP areas have seen very different experiences with furlough and unemployment, even at this stage when the furlough support schemes are still live. So for example, we see regions like Oxfordshire and Cambridgeshire, Peterborough, which we see down towards the left-hand side of this chart. They've seen a relatively low percentage of their workforce furloughed in May, and they've also seen relatively low unemployment over the past few months. And that probably reflects the fact that those regions I mentioned have higher than average industry concentration in high paying, higher skilled jobs, so things like science and tech, that have been doing okay during this period and will continue to do pretty well going forward. Then if we look at a couple of regions where they've seen the largest percentage of workers furloughed, so Cumbria and the New Anglia LEP region, right across the right-hand side of the graph, they've actually seen low numbers of unemployment, low growth in unemployment in the past few months. And that's probably, again, reflective of their industry makeup. So Cumbria, for example, is heavily reliant on nuclear power. So those industries may have had a short-term furloughing of staff, but they absolutely need those workers long-term, so they won't be making people unemployed. And then finally, we see areas like big cities like Manchester and Birmingham and Leeds, which are sort of sitting in the middle of the graph towards the top there, where they've actually seen some pretty significant escalation in unemployment in the past few months, which again is probably reflective of their economies having a higher than average number of frontline jobs in sectors like retail and restaurants and bars, etc. So this kind of regional picture is going to be really interesting going forward, because different regions will undoubtedly experience different situations as furlough begins to wind down and come to an end. So the data there has been telling us a lot about what's happened over this past 5 months, what's happening right now, and also what might be in store for us in the coming months for the UK and its regional labour markets. And with that scene set, I'd like to now introduce Tom Lowe from Collab Group to give his thoughts on what this all means for the FE sector. Over to you, Tom, and you've got control of the slides.
Great, thanks, Anthony. Hi, everybody. Very pleased to be joining you all here today. So my name is Tom Lowe, and I'm from the Collab Group, which represents further education colleges across the UK. So we've been engaged in the last few months in a piece of work looking at how colleges can support with the post-COVID-19 economic recovery efforts. So as Anthony laid out in the slides preceding mine, we know that the UK is facing pretty severe economic challenges, not just in the short term, but also in the longer term too. So we're seeing declining GDP, declining productivity, and the prospect of slowing economic growth. That's coupled with rising unemployment and the prospect of large-scale redundancies. And we're seeing a lot of the most important economic sectors facing sharp contractions, both in output and also in their hiring patterns. So we as a membership body wanted to understand what our colleges are saying about the crisis, how they have responded to what is undoubtedly a fairly unprecedented situation. So we sent out a survey to leaders in our colleges, and it found there was firstly significant concern about the apprenticeship market and how quickly that would recover. And that was coupled with a broader sense of concern about the overall financial sustainability and stability of colleges. There was concern about the capacity of employers to engage with education and training organisations at the present time. But colleges have also been able to demonstrate a real sense of flexibility. They've been able to adapt to the conditions of the crisis, whether that's through moving their courses online or continuing to provide a range of support services across the student community. As part of that, colleges, I think, rightly see themselves as key stakeholders, key delivery organisations to assist with the economic recovery efforts. There is, however, a sense that we picked up that there's slightly less confidence that the government is actually putting colleges at the heart of the agenda for economic recovery, as in our view, they rightly should. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So a couple of weeks ago, the Chancellor stood up in the House of Commons to announce a range of skills-based initiatives to try and boost the economy. These will doubtlessly be familiar to you also. I don't propose going over them in great detail, but to just give a quick recap of the highlights, there's the £2 billion investment in the new Kickstarter programme for young people to get access to opportunities for work placements and training opportunities. There's a record £111 million investment in traineeships. There are new employer subsidies for taking on apprentices. There's an extra £1 billion of support to the DWP to hire more work coaches, as well as a range of initiatives that includes the expansion of sector-based work academies and more investment for targeted level 2 and 3 training for 18 to 19-year-olds. So I just want to pause for a second to reflect on some of these announcements, because there's no doubt that it was a bold package. It was a comprehensive set of reforms. But the focus, whilst these measures undoubtedly focus on young people, which I think is correct, as the prospect of youth unemployment is really, really severe, and it's right that the government is taking all measures to try and address what could be quite a protracted crisis. We think that more policy interventions are also needed around the areas of adult skills, because we think that's going to be really, really important as part of the recovery efforts. We're also hearing feedback from employers that it's a bit unclear at the moment how these programs will work alongside one another. So what will be the impact, for example, of the new Kickstarter program on the take-up of apprenticeship opportunities? Then on the new subsidies that have been offered for apprenticeships, we're getting a sense from some employers, just through informal feedback, that the subsidies may serve to seal the deal for employers that were thinking about recruiting an apprentice anyway, but may not do enough to convince somebody that wasn't going to convince an apprentice that would be a good course of action for their business and the development of skills within their workforce. So we do very much welcome the announcements made by the Chancellor a couple of weeks ago, but it's clear that because of the scale of the challenge, far more in terms of a policy response is needed. So over the last few months, we've been engaging with government and employers, as well as our members, about how colleges can support with the economic recovery efforts. So we hope to present a vision for colleges as integral to the economic recovery. We want to understand what support colleges need in order to do this, and we hope to feed some of this thinking into the comprehensive spending review process in the autumn. So what I want to run through now at a very high level are some concepts, some ideas that we've developed for how we think colleges can best support the economic recovery efforts. So the first concept is around the creation of what we're calling skills and jobs hubs. So in recent times, we've seen an economy that's operated under more or less conditions of full employment. So as Anthony identified in the earlier slides, there could be a severe challenge once the job retention scheme winds down, and a lot more people are going to need access to careers, information, advice, and guidance services. So there's a real issue in terms of how we ramp up capacity across the UK. We're working on a proposition which would see colleges being able to leverage their estates and their expertise to support job seekers through these local skills and jobs hubs. This work we envision would supplement the activities of Jobcentre Plus and of work coaches throughout the existing employment support infrastructure. Now, we think that there are some self-evident reasons why this could make sense. The first is that we're hearing a lot from DWP at the moment about the idea of youth hubs. So DWP is really thinking about how it facilitates and creates new opportunities for young people to either get into education and training, get some work experience, or get into sustainable employment. Now, as things stand, we think that colleges as community institutions, as familiar locations, as welcoming environments could stand as better places to engage with young people at the moment as they embark on what is undoubtedly going to be, in some cases, quite a challenging and quite a protracted process. So we think that the role of colleges as community institutions, as welcoming and familiar institutions, would make sense to leverage their estates. We also think then, because of the expertise of staff within colleges, that they could do a lot to supplement the activity of work coaches across the DWP, and in this way being able to signpost people to further training opportunities, or where relevant, helping to match them to jobs in the local labour market. Now, this would be underpinned by a process of what we're calling skills diagnostic and skills matching services. So we see there's a crucial role for colleges to play in being able to match people to local opportunities. This we envision would be underpinned to a great extent by labour market information, and also would be able to leverage the deep understanding and the deep employer relationships that colleges have in order to identify what skills and what qualifications job seekers have, when necessary, helping to match people to training opportunities, and also assisting with job placement support and work experience opportunities. Now, as I mentioned before, we see retraining as a key piece of how colleges can support with the economic recovery efforts. It's likely we'll see large numbers of adults requiring training to help them move from the sectors that are in most difficulty into those which might expand or recover more quickly. But as things stand, we see there are quite a few barriers to permitting a flexible and an adaptive system for retraining. The funding mechanisms for adult retraining probably need to be adjusted and modified. We wonder, for example, that under the current system, if learners will have to take out loans through the Advanced Learner Loan Programme, that serve as an incentive for them to access training opportunities. We also note that as the system presently is constructed, so much funding may be more effective to help people to access either modular training through short courses, which can be delivered at volume and at speed to help top up existing skills, and where necessary, point people in a slightly new direction. And we see this being enabled in 4 core ways. So it will be around the flexibility in funding mechanisms, tailoring provision to the needs of the local economy, ensuring better digital enablement and increased digital delivery capacity, and investment in teaching and lecturing resource. And finally, we also see apprenticeships and traineeships as absolutely crucial and a key way that colleges will be able to contribute to the wider economic recovery effort. So we think there's an argument for looking to prioritise training, so pre-apprenticeship training for sectors that support key workers or sectors that have a good chance of recovering quickly. We may also need to think about what incentives, in addition to those announced by the Chancellor a couple of weeks ago, could be introduced to help to stimulate demand for apprenticeships in areas where there are skills gaps, or in particular areas that have a big impact on our skills and productivity. And where necessary, we think there may be an argument to look at how the apprenticeship funding rules can be granted sufficient flexibility in order to allow people a smooth transition either into an apprenticeship while they're undertaking an apprenticeship, and allow people to progress from an apprenticeship. So in summation, these are the four broad areas that we're looking at. So it's around the creation of skills and jobs hubs, around retraining and upskilling programs targeted across key economic sectors, around skills diagnostic and rapid skills matching support, and around an apprenticeship offer that's aligned to the needs of the economy. So this piece of work we're doing is very much part of an evolving, an iterative conversation about the role that colleges can play in supporting economic recovery. So very keen to hear any contributions, any thoughts that people might have. Just on the final slide here, I've included my email address, so very, very happy to hear from people with any thoughts or any suggestions that they have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Absolutely fascinating stuff there, some really detailed suggestions coming from Collab Group, which seem very much centred on FE playing that regional leadership role, which we're concentrating on this morning. And you've kind of hinted there at some of the potential hurdles and roadblocks around, for example, lack of clarity on adult funding so far, the fact that apprenticeships are crucial to everyone's recovery, but it's very difficult for employers and providers to be going with apprenticeships right now. If I could ask you, in your opinion, what's the kind of single biggest obstacle to these Collab plans happening?
Well, I think undoubtedly there is, as is often the case with policy interventions like this, an investment component. And it's clear that there are lots of areas that need public sector investment at the moment, aspects of healthcare and social care that could lay an equal claim to being important. And so I think that there's been a lot of great work, actually, I think that's been done in the sector as of late in terms of articulating that long-term vision for colleges and why they're important, and why investment in colleges is about so much more than skills. It's also about healthy, productive, happy communities. So I think that part of what needs to be done is building on the great work that the sector has done in terms of articulating a vision for itself. And I think that one of the things that I guess there are two big things coming down for the FE sector over the next few months, and specifically in the autumn. One is the comprehensive spending review. So that's going to be very consequential in terms of deciding what kind of sustainable funding settlement that the sector gets going forward. And the other will be this proposed white paper for the FE sector. Now, I think on both counts, there hasn't been a huge amount publicly in terms of what those processes are going to look like. So I think a big part of going forward is going to be, as I say, the sector putting forward a really compelling vision for itself that seeks to show how investment in FE is an investment in a broad array of different things that strengthen communities, individuals, and help employers.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tom. I really do appreciate you spending the time to share these thoughts with us today. And if there are any comments or questions from attendees, we'll come to those at the end. Great. I thought there was some really fascinating stuff in there, particularly around the idea of skills and skills programs being central to the recovery, that notion of local action and local planning, perhaps being delivered by local skills and job hubs, I think is fascinating. And you mentioned there of modular skills, so, skills being modular programs driven by kind of employer and economy-wide skill needs. It's very much kind of what we're hearing as well, and what we're proposing as well, which leads us on nicely, because I'm now going to ask my colleague Carla from MZ to quickly talk to us about how data can actually allow colleges and providers to start putting some of these ideas into action, so to sort of start operationally leading local labour markets and communities through the coming weeks and months. So morning, Carla, over to you.
Morning, Anthony. Thanks. And yeah, so we've heard a lot about how local insight is key. So what data can we actually use then to help colleges lead locally? So for any response and recovery, I think, to be truly successful, it will need to happen at a local level. And we've seen from some of the data that Anthony shared earlier that it needs to be, we know that every area is different and has its own local strengths in terms of industrial and occupational mix. So it needs to be tailored to those specific needs, and every college needs to understand the needs to drive that recovery, and kind of what needs to drive that recovery. And it was really nice to hear from Tom that the colleges very much do see themselves as driving this. I think Anthony will talk about demonstrating impact a little bit later, but for colleges to put themselves at the forefront of that local response, we'll have a look over the next few slides about what data can actually help us develop a strategy geared to giving people the skills that they need to get back into work. So next slide, please, Anthony. Some of you might know that we've recently launched FE Analyst. So based on a lot of feedback from our sector leaders, we've made the MZ data suite, we think, more easier to use than ever before. So the idea of the new workflow is that the user can quickly see what's happening in the local economy, so they can see that big picture overview, how that links with the college's current offer, and then easily identify those in-demand skills needs that we've talked about of local employers that need to be reflected in the curriculum. So if we concentrate on regional recovery and response, the first column allows us to do this. So it gives us a really good overview of the big picture. Next slide, please. So as well as the largest and biggest growth industries, as we can see on the slide, the data also allows us to quickly see an overview of things like overall in-demand skills of employers that the employers are asking for in the region, and things like job seekers, allowance, claimant counts for an area to give us that high-level overview. We've recently launched a regional recovery tool as well. So what we really want to do is answer some of those key questions about the area college serves. So we've got that traditional structural labour market data, but what can we take from claimant counts and job postings that helps us understand what types of workers are being laid off, what skills they possess, what occupations and industries are beginning to see growth. So thinking about that, supporting of re-emerging markets, and kind of really putting into place efficient reskilling strategies. And then what kind of skills do we need to build into curriculum and teach to those who are trying to get back into those growth sectors. So regional recovery is really taking that traditional structural labour market data and teaming it up with some of that really nice kind of on the ground tactical level, what's happening now in terms of job postings and claimant counts. Next slide, please. So we've heard a lot from many customers and a lot of sector experts that from the new academic year, it will very much be business as usual in terms of curriculum planning. So thinking about long term and not so much of the short term here and now, understanding that kind of local effect from COVID will be vital for being able to support those re-emerging markets and skills strategies. The course development or the curriculum kind of planning stream in FE Analyst lends itself really well to this. So next slide, please, Anthony. Alongside the data that we've seen up to now, being able to map that existing provision that you're offering to associated occupations will really allow curriculum staff and leaders to look at those regional skills needs, look at how the current curriculum meets those needs, and then from that be able to adjust and kind of adapt future provision to deliver those vital skills. So picking up on the associated occupations that map to those completions and courses that you already offer, and having a look at kind of the long-term growth around that is really key. Layering in some of that data then, so next slide please, Anthony. Layering in some of that data that we've talked about on things like top companies posting, the job titles that they're posting for, and then the skills, then allows that next level of regional response. So we've heard a lot from Tom about skills and how that's kind of key to regional recovery. So building this data in really allows us to make sure that the right skills are being taught to give people the best chance of that regain in employment. So all this is available in the regional recovery tool and the FE analyst tool. So they are now live. So for any customers who are wondering how to get hold of those, just give John or I an email and we'll be able to point you in the right direction. So back to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Carla. Really, really useful. There's obviously there a lot of data available right now that can help colleges and providers through the coming weeks and months in their kind of COVID response planning, but also in their, their kind of standard curriculum planning and employer engagement and student engagement activities as well. So really appreciate you sharing that with us. And thinking of a couple of recent tender opportunities that the Department of Education have published, that certainly sounds like it will be extremely useful right now. Excuse me. So firstly, the tender not long published about additional course funding for certain courses for 18 and 19-year-olds, which I think Tom mentioned in one of his earlier slides, essentially looking to avoid unemployment and providing funding to support that. Note here that the department are calling these high-value courses. What do they mean by that? Well, maybe it's about courses that will help avoid unemployment because there is high employee demand from employers for those qualifications, and particularly for the skills that people are given if they have the skills that are inherent in those qualifications. And also providers are going to need to evidence that. So they're going to need to evidence how these courses will support employment, support jobs, and support actual skill demand in their area. Or how can you as a provider evidence employer demand for skills? Well, you've just shown us there, Carla. I think some of that data is absolutely crucial to this. And then likewise, another procurement notice that you might have seen from the Department for Education over the past couple of weeks. This one about a different model for designing and procuring adult training. And as Tom mentioned, the widespread support for adults isn't necessarily there yet, but some of these procurement notices hint, I think, at where the Department of Education might be heading. So they're looking to trial this in a small number of regions to begin with, and it's initially about digital skills and technical skills, but I would have thought this will very much become a more widespread model for regional design and procurement of skills training for adults, both in the immediate post-COVID world and longer term. And a couple of things jumped out at this notice to me. Firstly, that the training model that they are looking to procure is about providing specialist skills in hard to fill vacancies for employers. Well, again, how can providers be right on top of that? Again, I think the data that you've just shown us, Carla, is absolutely crucial to that, to having that picture of what is going on in your region, what skills are in demand from which employers. And similarly, here they talk about training, basically forming a pre-employment sort of quasi-induction stage of employment for an adult. So again, that's going to need to be very much centered around specific technical skills that the employers want. How can providers be ahead of the curve in knowing about that? So knowing about their locally specific skill trends and what employers in their region are asking for? Well, by using the strong labour market and skills data that exists. Now then, the final thing we wanted to cover off today relates to the strategic importance and the strategic reach of colleges and providers in your local communities and local labour markets. So we've heard people like the Association of Colleges talk a lot about colleges being anchor institutions in their local communities and labour markets. And then last week, or maybe the week before, we saw an update from the Independent Commission on the College of the Future. And in that document, they talked about the importance of each community having a sense of place and how colleges and providers should be central to that community sense of place. And you know, you all listening today know just how many individuals and employees you already help in your local area, year in, year out, and have been doing for a long time in many cases. So you're already providing that anchor institution, you're already providing that sense of place, but can you actually prove the economic importance and economic impact of what you do as a college and a provider? Can you talk about how much economic leadership and impact you actually bring to your region? Well, economic impact analysis is something that here at EMSI we've been doing for a long time. In fact, it's the very first thing that EMSI ever did as a company. So we've now helped thousands of organisations around the world to evidence just how important they are in their local communities and labour markets and how much impact they actually have. So demonstrating your economic impact involves analysing a load of different things that I'm not going to run through in its entirety. But two of those things are really important. Firstly, the additional economic activity that college generates and the additional economic income that results from that increased economic activity that just happens because of your sheer existence as a business. And then secondly, what all of the upskilling and training that you deliver means in terms of added annual economic value. So the first one then, the first element, you know, you as an institution are a significant employer, a significant regional economic institution, that anchor institution. You employ lots of local people who will then often remain living locally and spending their wages locally. You also spend a lot of money locally on keeping buildings open and operating, buying goods and services. A good portion of that spend on your staff and on your suppliers is then recycled and spent again locally. So it churns through the economy and multiplies through the economy. That's how local economies and labour markets work. So all of that additional money generates more and more economic activity, so that each year you as an organisation, just by your existence, are creating additional economic activity and additional economic income in your region. And when we run this analysis for colleges and providers, we often see that a single college is often providing as much annual economic income as entire industry sectors do. Then the second element that's really important is when we think about learners and students. So each hour of learning contributes to making someone more productive. Then levels of qualification and achievement of qualification further increase value to employers in your region. And therefore, that's increasing the earning potential for your students and the individuals you help. And just pause there and think about the hundreds and thousands of individuals who have came through your doors over the past, say, 10 to 15 years. Lots of those individuals will still live and work locally and will have progressed in their careers. So they'll be adding value into the local economy year on year, and the training and the upskilling you provided to them has played a huge part in that. So your economic impact we can kind of summarize by kind of thinking about this graphic. So as learners gain more skills, they become more productive and more valuable to local employers. Those individuals earn more. They continue to add more and more value to their employer and the wider industry sector in which they're employed. So that means that individuals and employers and sectors are earning more locally, are spending more locally, they're paying more taxes, they're buying more and more stuff, which all adds up to more annual economic income and activity in your region. Simple as that, really. So you already are a local leader in your regional economy, your regional community, and your regional labour market. So why not get the analysis to back that up and evidence it? I would have thought that's going to be more and more important and more useful for providers as the department are tendering for things, and as other organisations like LEPs are asking for you to prove that leadership and give that leadership. Why not have the evidence to back up what a fantastic job you're already doing? In summary then, what are the key messages that I hope you can take from today's webinar? Well, we all know that the past few months have had a huge impact across the economy and across national and regional labour markets. So we've seen from the data that all types of jobs across all industry sectors in all regions of the UK have been negatively affected. We're starting to see things open up again and some signs of positivity. However, the coming few months will be very difficult, and we'll certainly see some tough times unemployment-wise. Through the coming months, skills are going to be vital to the recovery of the UK economy and UK labour markets. And so FE is surely very well placed to be leaders in that recovery. As we heard from Tom and the Collab Group, the sector already has inbuilt expertise and facilities that can be a massive help. And hopefully that's recognised and the sector can be maximised. And as Carla showed us, strong labour market and skills data can help providers understand the regional picture to help drive that regionally, locally led action and that regional leadership that the sector can provide. And that local insight is absolutely key to enabling that. But we're not starting from a blank sheet here. The sector, the FE sector already has a significant economic footprint and a significant annual economic impact. We can help you measure and evidence that, so why don't we shout about it collectively? Keep an eye out for more coming from MZ. So we'll be publishing more and more data pieces and blog pieces in the coming weeks. We'll have more webinars targeted at the FE sector with partners, where we talk about some of the ways we can help and some of the other challenges that the sector is facing, and also cognizant of budget pressures and budget uncertainty going forward. We've got a range of pricing offers available for those of you who want to access our data and our expertise. So please do reach out to us, as well as keeping an eye on the blog. My contact details on screen here. You'll receive a copy of the recording of today. So please do use that to share with colleagues and reach out to me. It's the end of our slides. Debbie, do we have any questions?
No, we don't. So you obviously did a good job. Thank you, Anthony.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to say a special thanks to Tom from Collab Group for taking the time to prepare slides and join us and share his thoughts. Thanks also to my colleague Carla for giving her expertise on how colleges and providers can use our data. Hope you found it useful, and we look forward to speaking to you all soon. Positioning your college or your organisation as a local leader